The concept of stabilizers is a completely misunderstood and misused term in the lifting world. So I thought I would chat with you guys and gals a little bit about this. And this is one of those things where when people say things like stabilizers, right? They say things like stabilizers when talking about lifts. So they'll say, "Oh, I think that's a stabilizer weakness." You can very quickly assess if they actually know anything at all about human physiology. Because people who lack actual knowledge, they tend to view stabilizers as just their own muscles. In other words, they'll say stabilizers, and it's like, well, can you name them? They'll say, well, I think that's a stabilizer weakness on the squat. That's a stabilizer weakness on these dips. That's what's causing that. And they tend to have this view of stabilizers as hundreds of tiny little muscles somewhere running along the body that are not actually big major muscles. And the fact of the matter is, if these quote unquote stabilizers were actually small muscles, they would be completely useless. In other words, if you're trying to stabilize a 400-pound back squat, or a 275-pound bench, or a weighted dip, if the stabilizer muscles involved were, say, the size of your pinky finger, they would be completely useless. They wouldn't be strong enough to stabilize anything. But people treat it that way. They throw this term out there. And they also act like they'll say, well, doing this lift will build stronger stabilizers. And it's like, no, it doesn't. Having strong stabilizers would be a good idea to load more weight and to get stronger at that lift. But the lift itself isn't going to build the stabilizers. Like I can assure you right now that a bench press or a dip does not significantly hypertrophy or strengthen any of the major stabilizers, unless you completely avoid training the stabilizers directly and you're a completely novice lifter. That is the only situation, literally the only situation in which the stabilizers are going to see significant growth. And even the squat, we have hypertrophy studies looking at one of the major stabilizers on the squat. And it actually only caused a very, very, very minimal amount of hypertrophy in the single most important dynamic stabilizer, which is the hamstrings. So here's where you look at this, and people they don't get that. And I'll give you a hint. If you want to know what the most important stabilizers are on most lifts, they're the opposing muscle groups. Okay, in other words, doing pull-ups or chin-ups builds the stabilizers for the bench press. Right? Now, this is barring your abdominal muscles, but we could have a talk about that too, couldn't we? What's the best way to build a muscle up? Is it to train it isometrically? No, of course not. Of course not. So let's stop and think about that for a minute. So we'll get to the abdominals in just a minute also. But so what are the stabilizers on a bench press or a dip? Well, it's the biceps. Biceps are way up there. Okay? Biceps are a major stabilizer on both those movements. And on bench press, the wider you grip it, the more of a stabilizer the biceps have to become, to the point to where they start lighting up on the EMG. But it doesn't mean that they're getting a good training stimulus, because there's not really significant tension being placed on the fibers themselves. Okay? But biceps, those are a stabilizer. Your latissimus dorsi, your posterior deltoids, okay? Those are probably the three biggest stabilizers on the bench press. Now, to some extent, forearms and grip, because again, being able to lock those wrists into position, that's an important stabilizer. So your forearm flexors and extensors, particularly the flexors, those are stabilizers on the bench press because they help us maintain the bar position, right? Without the wrist getting cocked back as much, if we can keep the bar over the wrist bone. All right, those are stabilizers. But the biceps, the lats, the rear delts, those are the stabilizers. And it's the same on the dip. So when people talk about stabilizers in that regard, I'd be like, well, if you need your stabilizers stronger, maybe you should do pull-ups and curls. That'll build the stabilizers for a dip or for a bench press. Right? How about a squat? How about a deadlift? Okay, for a back squat, hamstrings are big, big important stabilizer. How about your whole abdominal wall? So abdominals, obliques. Okay. Okay. See where we're going with that? So, yeah, we could make the case for the abs in those certain positions. Again, more of the shortened position, or the lengthened position, I mean, right? But it's isometric on those movements. Is that the best way to train it? In other words, do isometrics always make muscles bigger and stronger? Yeah, they can, but they don't work as effectively. So if you wanted to strengthen your abs for the purpose of a back squat or a deadlift, wouldn't you just do direct ab work? Something that actually works the muscle through a long enough range of motion that it creates more size. Now, we can make the case for joint angle specificity and say, okay, yeah, but I mean, you don't need it strongest in the contracted positions, the shortened positions, because that's not necessarily where it's always going. Okay, but you do realize that will carry over, that hypertrophy from those movements will carry over. So if you can get your abs bigger, it'll help. And it's the opposite on the other. Using them as a stabilizer. Now, in that case, it will cause some growth, but nowhere near as if you just did weighted crunches or hanging leg raise or something. Okay. So if you need bigger, stronger stabilizers, you should probably train them directly. Okay. In other words, again, think about the biceps, and this should be a simple concept. Biceps are one of the most important stabilizers on the bench press because it helps stabilize the elbow joint, right? Anybody ever built massive biceps from the bench press? Like, has anyone out there ever said, yeah, I built really big biceps, not triceps, really built big biceps from doing wide grip benching? You're like, that doesn't even make your arms as big. That wider grip works less tricep and more pec. Yeah. But it also it uses the stabilizers of the biceps even more as you go wider. That's confirmed in the data. Anyone ever built massive biceps from just bench pressing? Of course not. Or from dips? No. Do it from curls. They do it from chin-ups. All those things. So in other words, the lifts themselves don't make the stabilizers grow that significantly. It can be small amounts. And we've seen that in the lab. But if you want bigger, stronger stabilizers, you probably need to actually train those stabilizer muscles. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.